You've reached the point in your career where you're moving from a doer of things to a manager of people, and that can be a really tough transition. I've done it myself, and I want to share with you my top 5 tips for how to manage that transition. Here we go. I'm Sue with Carmine Media. I help women level up their language and their leadership so they can be more successful at work. Before we go much further into this, I want to talk about what it means to lead. You're moving from a doer of things, like I said, to a director of people. And that means you need to motivate your team, keep them on task, and communicate clearly the goals of the organization and how their projects line up to those goals. They need to know the why of what they're doing. This isn't a new analogy, but think of it like you're in a boat rowing and you're in charge of the course. You're leading the boat. First of all, is everyone rowing? Are they all rowing in the same direction? Do they understand where we're going? Are they rowing in sync? If you're new to leadership, one of the first things that you'll want to do is educate yourself on some leadership philosophy. I listen to a lot of leadership podcasts. One is the Harvard Business Review Leadership, and there's another one called Women at Work. I love those podcasts. They're excellent for helping you just build your leadership skills and strengthen that muscle. There's also a lot of great leadership books out there. I recommend quite a few of them at the link in my bio at the Amazon finds. I definitely recommend you read some books on leadership if you're new to it. Some of my recommendations would be Radical Candor by Kim Scott, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. That's a really good one. It's about how to negotiate. And he was a former FBI negotiator for hostage situations, so he really knows what he's talking about. I recommend a lot of those to my clients when I'm coaching. I think some of the techniques that he has in there are spot on. For women, The Likability Trap is a really important book, and also How Remarkable Women Lead. To further build that muscle in leadership, you might think about taking some classes or certification around leadership. I have some courses on my website, and of course, I'm always available for one-on-one coaching. I help women like you succeed in leadership. The next thing you want to do is build your knowledge and your expertise around what your team is responsible for doing. If you've already been working on that team, you know exactly what those responsibilities are. But if you're being brought in as a manager to a new team, the first thing you need to do is listen. Interview each one of your team members and ask them what their challenges are. What do they do for the organization? How does that line up with the larger business goals? If they don't know, help them figure it out. One thing I want to remind you is that you don't have to know all of the skills that are involved in this day-to-day operation of your team. What your team does, you don't have to be in the weeds there. In this conversation you're having with your team, remind them that you're now accountable for what they do. Part of your new role is to make sure that your team is meeting their goals. You're there to support them, you're there to help them, but you're also now accountable for what they're doing. And they need to understand that, so they're not looking at you as just someone that's telling them what to do now. What you do need to understand is a high-level view of what it is they do and how it contributes to the overall goals of the company and your team. So don't freak out if you don't understand all the nitty-gritty details, because you don't have to. That's why you have these team members in place. You delegate those details to them because that's what they're good at. What you are good at is keeping that 10,000-foot view and making sure that everyone is working toward a common goal. When I say build your expertise, that's what I mean. Not understanding all of the nitty-gritty details, but building the expertise around the general ideas of what it is your team does. For example, maybe you lead a team of developers. Maybe you don't really know how to write code, but you do know how to manage a team and drive results and efficiencies. That's where your expertise comes in. Their expertise is writing the code. Yours is in driving results. And that takes me to number 3. You need to demonstrate your ability to drive results. You're now responsible for reporting up to leadership the successes of your team. You need to learn to brag a little bit. As a leader or a director, whatever level you are, you're now responsible for being able to articulate and demonstrate the value that your team brings to the organization. And that means being able to measure specific goals. Now let me backtrack a little bit. Before you do that, you want to make sure that you and your leadership are aligned in the goals that you're trying to achieve. You all need to agree on what success looks like, what metrics matter to them. Figure that out first, and all of you need to agree on it. Then you communicate that to your team, and you communicate that up to leadership. And as long as you all agree on what success looks like, then you can start working toward that. So let me give you some practical examples. For me, I'm a social media manager. So success looks like brand awareness. That's measured by reach, for example, in Facebook. Those kinds of connections that you can make where you can actually measure and put a data point to something is going to mean a lot to leadership. They care about those data points. Some of the additional responsibilities you're going to run into as a new leader is you're not just managing your team anymore. Now you need to understand how your team fits into the larger organization. And that's going to mean building relationships with the managers, the directors, the VPs outside of your own team. So what does this look like in a practical sense? You start copying in other leaders when you have something that might relate to them. You start asking questions, setting up meetings with some of the other leaders to explain your new role, what you're accountable for, how you're going to measure it within your team, and how will that align with what they're doing. They might have critical information that they could share with you that you didn't even know existed. One thing I want to mention is if you are promoted internally and you're going from someone who was peers with these people and who now is over them, I know that can be really awkward. So the first thing you want to do is just admit that it's awkward. Yes, we're going to go through this transition. I need your help. This critical time also helps you build relationships with each of your team members. Get to know them as real people. Talk about things outside of work. Ask them about their life. They need to feel heard and accepted and that you care about them. One of the ways I like to lead a team and get to know my team members is with one-on-ones. My one-on-ones are very unstructured. I provide access to me as their leader for 1 hour once a month. You can decide however often you want to do it. Of course, it depends on the size of your team. For me, once a month works very well. And that time is their time. I require them to bring the agenda to me. What do you want to talk about? What battles are you having? How can I help you? And it doesn't have to be growth within the company or always career. It can just be personal stuff too. This is your unfettered access to me. So you bring whatever it is you want to talk about and we'll talk about that. These one-on-ones are not work status updates. Keep that for other meetings. These are for discussions, deep discussions to get to know your team members and what they care about. And if they want to cancel, they can cancel. This is their time. I know that seems like it's fluffy for a lot of us, especially if we're very goal-oriented, but getting to know your team members on an individual basis is so critical to making them feel like they're valued and they belong in the organization. They belong on your team. So part of this networking and building relationships is around company culture, right? As a leader, you now represent the company more than ever. And the company culture is something that you need to impart with your team. You're always going to be a champion for it. You stay in line with the company culture. You're now starting to see some of the organization at a higher level, and they don't have that visibility. So when you are assigning them a task, you need to give that context to them so they have all the tools they need and the information they need to be successful. Otherwise, there's going to be a big disconnect in what work product you get versus what you thought you were going to get. One example for providing context in a work setting is when you loop someone in on an email, just add their name and don't provide any context. So they have to get out their secret decoder ring, read through the whole email thread to figure out what it is that's needed from them and what is going on with the situation. If you provide a couple of sentences of context and what it is you need, you're going to save them a whole lot of time and you're going to look like a stronger leader. There's a lot of reasons why what you've said may or may not land on them the same way you thought it would. So check in and make sure that what you're saying is being understood. So let's recap. As you are moving from a manager to a director or from a doer of things to a leader of people, you are, 1, developing your leadership skills, either by listening to podcasts, reading books, taking classes, whatever it takes so that you build that muscle. You are demonstrating your ability to drive results by creating meaningful metrics that you can attach to your team's goals and their work product. You are building your knowledge and your expertise around what it is they do, and you're doing that by listening and learning. You are taking on additional responsibilities. And what that means is networking across the departments. You're starting to do higher level projects. You're starting to see how the other teams fit in with the common goals and what information they have that will be useful to your team. And you're building relationships across the network. You are leveraging those relationships so that your team has all of the tools it needs to succeed. Remember, if you're new to leadership, this is a muscle you're going to build. It's not something you're going to flip a switch and be able to do. Concentrate on growing and learning, and you'll get there. Just promise yourself and your team that you're working on these skills. If you're in the middle of this right now and you're struggling, I'm here to help. I offer one-on-one coaching. I have leadership classes, and I have a new book out called Leadership Linguistics that helps you with the language in your leadership. Language is critical, and I offer a lot of good tips in that book.